Little girl arrives at school with a strange smell coming from her backpack. The principal looks inside and calls 911. Before we start the story, leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from, follow our channel, and don't miss emotional stories every day. Enjoy the story. It was the kind of Tuesday morning that Principal Margaret Holden had experienced 1,000 times before. The elementary school hummed with familiar sounds, children's laughter echoing down freshly polished hallways, the rhythmic squeak of tennis shoes on linoleum, and teachers' gentle reminders floating from classrooms. At 62, Margaret had perfected the art of school administration, running Willow Creek Elementary with the precision of a Swiss watch. "Good morning, Mrs. Holden," voices called as she made her rounds, her silver hair pulled into its customary neat bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She responded with practiced warmth, checking items off her mental list. Budget meeting at 10, teacher evaluations to review, lunch monitor schedule to finalize. She almost didn't notice the small figure standing outside her office door. "Mrs. Holden?" The tiny voice belonged to Ellie Harper, a 6-year-old with Down syndrome and the brightest smile in first grade. Today, that smile was missing, replaced by an uncertain frown as she clutched her worn purple backpack against her chest. "Good morning, Ellie," Margaret said, unlocking her office door. "You're here. Early today. My backpack smells funny," Ellie said matter-of-factly, her wide brown eyes serious beneath uneven bangs that looked self-trimmed. Daddy tried to wash it, but it got worse. It was only then that Margaret noticed the unmistakable odor, something sour and unsettling mingling with the artificial strawberry scent that always surrounded Ellie. The child shifted from foot to foot, clearly troubled. "May I see?" Margaret asked, setting her coffee down and kneeling despite her arthritic knee. Ellie hesitated, then slowly unzipped the backpack. The smell intensified immediately, causing Margaret to hold her breath. Among crumpled papers and broken crayons, she spotted several plastic containers with what appeared to be school lunches from days ago, judging by their state. "Ellie, sweetheart, why do you have all these lunches in your bag?" The little girl's answer came with heartbreaking simplicity. "I was saving them for Daddy. He forgets to go shopping." Something shifted in Margaret's chest, a tightening that had nothing to do with the smell and everything to do with a memory suddenly surfacing. Her son Thomas at 7 years old, hiding granola bars in his desk for busy days when you forget breakfast, Mom. "Does your daddy forget things often?" Margaret asked carefully, maintaining a gentle tone despite her growing concern. Ellie nodded, her finger tracing the outline of a unicorn sticker on her backpack. "He calls me Caroline sometimes. That was my mommy's name." She looked up with innocent clarity. "But she's in heaven now." Margaret felt the familiar tension, the line between professional obligation and human connection blurring dangerously. Protocol demanded immediate reporting, forms filed, systems engaged. But systems were impersonal, and Margaret had seen too many children lost in their machinery. "Let's get you some breakfast," she said instead, closing the backpack and taking Ellie's small hand. "Then we can clean out your backpack together." As they walked to the cafeteria, Ellie skipping every third step, Margaret noticed the child's 2 small shoes and the sweater with a hole carefully stitched with different colored thread. Her professional armor cracked further when Ellie looked up suddenly and said, "You have kind eyes like my dad," before he started forgetting things. In that moment, Margaret made a decision that would change everything. One that bridged the principal she had always been with the woman she had forgotten how to be. "Tell me more about your dad, Ellie," she said as they entered the cafeteria. "I'd like to know him better." Behind them, the unopened backpack sat in Margaret's office containing what would prove to be just the first of many secrets about to unravel. The cafeteria was quiet this early in the morning, with only kitchen staff preparing for the day ahead. Margaret guided Ellie to a small table in the corner, away from the curious eyes that would soon fill the space. "Mrs. Garcia," Margaret called to the head cook, "could we trouble you for some breakfast for Ellie? She's had a rough morning." The warm-hearted woman nodded, returning moments later with a tray of scrambled eggs, toast, and apple slices cut into star shapes. Ellie's face brightened at the sight. "Thank you," she whispered, picking up a fork with careful determination. As Ellie ate, Margaret observed her more closely. Despite obvious neglect, there was something remarkably resilient about the child. Her clothes might be worn, but they were clean. Her hair, though unevenly cut, had been brushed. Someone was trying, however imperfectly. "Ellie," Margaret began gently, "can you tell me about mornings at your house?" Between bites, Ellie painted a concerning picture with innocent brushstrokes. "Daddy sleeps a lot. Sometimes he forgets to set his alarm clock." She carefully separated her eggs from her toast. "I get dressed all by myself. I can make cereal if there's milk." "And how do you get to school?" "The yellow bus. Sometimes we miss it and Daddy drives me, but he gets confused about the way." She looked up with sudden worry. "Am I in trouble about the lunches?" "No, sweetheart," Margaret assured her. "Not at all. I just want to help." The cafeteria doors swung open as Ryan Cooper, the new third-grade teacher, entered. His eyes met Margaret's, and she recognized the silent question. She nodded slightly, and he diverted his path to join them. "Good morning, Ellie." His enthusiasm drew a shy smile from the child. "Those star apples look amazing." "You can have one," Ellie offered immediately, pushing a star toward him. "That's very kind," Ryan said, accepting the gift. "You know what? I need to set up my classroom. Would you like to help me hang some new artwork before school?" "Darts?" Ellie looked to Margaret for permission. "That's a wonderful idea," Margaret nodded. "I need to make a few phone calls. Mr. Cooper will take good care of you." As Ryan led Ellie away, he glanced back at Margaret with understanding beyond his 30 years. Before becoming a teacher, he'd mentioned his own childhood in foster care. He recognized the signs better than most. Back in her office, Margaret closed the door and stared at Ellie's backpack, now sitting on her visitor's chair like an unwelcome truth. Protocol demanded she call Child Protective Services immediately. Instead, she found herself opening her bottom desk drawer, removing a faded manila folder labeled personal. Inside was a photograph she rarely allowed herself to see. Thomas at his high school graduation, his smile stiff and formal beside Margaret's own. They stood like polite strangers, her arm hovering near, but not quite touching his shoulder. Her own son, yet somehow a person she barely knew. Margaret picked up her phone and scrolled to her rarely used contacts, finding the number for Barbara Green, the school district's social services coordinator, and, more importantly, Margaret's former college roommate. "Barb, I need advice," she said when the call connected. Unofficially. 20 minutes later, Margaret had a plan that skirted the edges of protocol without breaking it entirely. She would make a home visit, assess the situation before filing any formal reports. She had 24 hours before mandatory reporting requirements would force her hand. The school secretary knocked lightly. "Mrs. Holden, the superintendent is on line 1 about the budget meeting. Tell him I'll need to reschedule," Margaret replied, surprising both the secretary and herself. In 20 years as principal, she had never postponed a budget meeting. As the morning bell rang, Margaret watched through her window as children flooded the hallways. Among them was Ellie, walking beside Ryan Cooper, her face animated as she pointed to artwork on the classroom door. For a moment, the little girl glanced toward the office window and waved, a simple gesture of trust that settled like a weight on Margaret's heart. She would visit the Harper home that afternoon, crossing the invisible line between professional obligation and personal involvement. What she didn't yet realize was that she was also crossing the line between the woman she had become and the woman she had once hoped to be. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rural Pennsylvania landscape as Margaret's sedan bumped along the unpaved section of Willow Road. Beside her in the passenger seat, Ellie bounced with nervous energy, her freshly cleaned backpack on her lap. "It's after that big tree," Ellie pointed, "the one that looks like a monster hand." Margaret slowed the car, noting how the houses had become increasingly sparse. The monster hand tree, an ancient oak with twisted branches. marked the final turn onto a narrow dirt driveway that seemed to disappear into overgrown grass. At the end of the path stood a small blue trailer, its once bright paint faded to a weathered periwinkle. A rusted pickup truck sat nearby, one tire noticeably flatter than the others. "That's our house," Ellie announced with unmistakable pride. "Daddy says it's like a ship sailing through the fields." Margaret parked, her professional assessment already cataloging concerns. Isolated location, visible disrepair, no nearby neighbors. Yet something about the carefully tended flower pots by the steps and the wind chime made from sea glass suggested care amidst the struggle. "Mrs. Holden?" Ellie's voice grew quieter. "Sometimes Daddy gets confused about who people are. Don't feel bad if he calls you by the wrong name." With that simple warning, Ellie hopped out of the car and ran to the door, calling out, "Daddy, I'm home. I brought my principal." The door opened to reveal James Harper, and Margaret's prepared speech momentarily faltered. The man before her wasn't what she'd expected. Tall and thin with prematurely silver-streaked dark hair, he had Ellie's same expressive brown eyes, though his held a fog of confusion that cleared only as he focused on his daughter. "There's my sunshine," he said, kneeling to embrace Ellie despite the visible stiffness in his movements. He looked up at Margaret with a flash of alarm before composing his features. "I'm sorry, are you from the school?" "I'm Margaret Holden, the principal at Willow Creek Elementary," she replied, extending her hand. "Ellie and I thought it might be good for us to meet." James straightened, shaking her hand with a grip that seemed to require concentration. "James Harper, please come in. I apologize for—" He gestured vaguely. "Everything." The interior of the trailer revealed a life unraveling at its seams. Dishes filled the small sink, mail was stacked in precarious piles, and a calendar on the wall was marked with crossed-out appointments. Yet there were also signs of recent effort, a hastily swept floor, a bunch of wildflowers in a mason jar, and neat stacks of children's books beside a small table clearly designated as Ellie's homework space. "Ellie, why don't you show Mrs. Holden your room while I make some tea?" James suggested, his voice carrying forced normality. Once Ellie disappeared down the narrow hallway, James turned to Margaret, his facade crumbling. "She had old food in her backpack again, didn't she?" His voice was low, edged with shame. "I tried to check it last night, but I forgot." "Mr. Harper," Margaret began gently, "I'm concerned about—" "James," he interrupted, "please, and you should be concerned. I am too." He rubbed his temples, a gesture that seemed practiced. "I was an electrical engineer. I built systems that couldn't fail because people's safety depended on them. And now I can't remember to check my daughter's backpack." Something in his directness disarmed Margaret's professional distance. "Early onset dementia," he continued, answering her unasked question. "The forgetting started 2 years ago, not long after my wife died. It's progressing faster than the doctors initially thought." From down the hallway came Ellie's voice. "Mrs. Holden, come see my special desk. Daddy made it from the trees behind our house." James's expression softened at his daughter's excitement. "She's everything," he said simply, "but I'm losing the battle to keep our lives together." In that moment, Margaret recognized the weight this man carried. Not neglect born of indifference, but a father desperately trying to hold back the tide of his own diminishing capacity. "I came here prepared to make a formal report," Margaret admitted. "But I think what's needed here is something different." James looked at her with unexpected clarity. "You remind me of Caroline," he said quietly. "She was practical too, always found a way forward when I could only see walls." Before Margaret could respond, Ellie bounded back into the room. "Did you see my desk? Daddy carved little birds on the edges." Margaret met James's gaze over his daughter's head, a silent understanding. Passing between them, two people recognizing something familiar in each other's struggles. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, meaning more than just the desk. "Absolutely beautiful. This crosses every professional boundary we have, Margaret." Superintendent Richard Caldwell's voice filled Margaret's office the following Monday morning, carrying the weight of 30 years in educational administration. He paced in front of her desk, his bow tie slightly askew, always a sign of his agitation. You've made 3 visits to a student's home in 5 days without filing a single report. You've brought groceries. You've arranged medical consultations. He stopped pacing to fix her with a stern look. The board has policies for a reason. Margaret sat straight-backed in her chair, hands folded calmly despite her racing thoughts. Through the window behind Caldwell, she could see Ellie playing hopscotch with classmates during morning recess, a new development that warmed her heart. Just last week, the child had spent recess alone. "I understand the concern, Richard," she replied. "But this situation requires nuance. If I file a report now, Ellie will likely be placed in emergency foster care while her father's condition is evaluated. They'll be separated at the exact moment when stability is most crucial." Caldwell sighed, removing his glasses to polish them with his handkerchief, his classic stalling gesture. "Margaret, you've been an exemplary principal for 2 decades. Your dedication to this school is unquestionable." He replaced his glasses. "But I'm worried you're becoming emotionally involved in a way that clouds your professional judgment." The accusation stung because it contained truth. Margaret's thoughts had indeed been consumed by the Harpers situation. She'd spent the weekend researching early-onset dementia and calling former colleagues who might help navigate healthcare options for James. "Perhaps I am," she admitted, surprising both Caldwell and herself with her candor. "But I'm also using my experience to recognize when the system might fail, rather than help." A knock at the door interrupted their standoff. Ryan Cooper stood in the doorway, a folder in hand. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, reading the tension in the room. "I can come back later." "No, please." Margaret gestured him in, grateful for the interruption. "Mr. Cooper has been instrumental in helping Ellie adjust." Ryan stepped forward, nodding respectfully to Caldwell. "I've brought Ellie's progress report. She's shown remarkable improvement in just 1 week." He handed the folder to Margaret, who passed it to the superintendent. Caldwell flipped through the pages, his expression softening slightly at the evidence of positive change. Ryan seized the moment. "Sir, before I became a teacher, I spent 8 years in the foster care system." His voice remained professional despite the personal revelation. "I had 13 placements. Some were wonderful. Others—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Less so. What made the difference wasn't policies or procedures. It was individual people who saw me as more than a case number." Margaret felt a surge of gratitude for the young teacher's perspective. Caldwell's frown remained, but his posture relaxed slightly. "I've given Mrs. Holden 2 weeks," Ryan continued. 2 weeks to help establish supports for the Harper family before any formal reports are filed. In that time, we've already seen significant improvements in Ellie's social engagement, academic participation, and emotional well-being. 2 weeks isn't standard protocol, Caldwell noted, though his tone had lost some of its edge. "No," Margaret agreed, "but sometimes the most valuable work happens in the spaces between standard protocols." After Caldwell left, with a reluctant agreement to extend Margaret's unofficial intervention period by 1 more week, Ryan lingered in the office. "Thank you," Margaret said simply. "That was brave." Ryan shrugged. "I recognized something in Ellie's situation, and in your response to it." He hesitated, then added, "We don't often get second chances to make a difference." His words resonated, uncomfortably close to thoughts Margaret had been avoiding. That evening, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing James Harper's medical documentation, her gaze drifted to the refrigerator, where a single magnet held a business card. Thomas Holden, attorney at law, with a Seattle phone number she'd never dialed. Her son, the boy she'd raised with detached efficiency while building her career, the teenager who'd grown increasingly distant, the man who now sent impersonal holiday cards, signed simply Thomas. A second chance there seemed impossible. Her phone chimed with a text message from James Harper. Ellie remembered to pack her homework today, all by herself. Small victories. Margaret smiled at the simple progress report. Small victories indeed. Perhaps the only kind that truly mattered in the end. She glanced again at Thomas's business card, then back to her phone. With sudden resolution, she created a new contact entry. Thomas' son. The word felt both foreign and necessary. Some boundaries Margaret was beginning to understand were meant to be crossed. The crisp October air carried the scent of wood smoke as Margaret pulled into the Harpers' driveway on Friday afternoon. 2 weeks had established a comfortable routine. She would bring groceries on Mondays and Fridays, help organize medications and appointments, and often stay for dinner. Simple meals where Ellie chattered about school, while James had what he called his good hours before evening confusion set in. Today, Margaret noticed immediate improvements. The yard had been raked, the porch swept. James had been having more lucid days since Dr. Evans, Margaret's former classmate, had adjusted his medication regimen at a reduced cost. "Mrs. Holden," Ellie burst through the door before Margaret. "Good knock. Daddy's having a super good day. He's showing me his special books." Inside, James sat at the small dining table surrounded by leather-bound journals, his eyes clearer than Margaret had seen them before. "Engineering notebooks," he explained as Margaret set down grocery bags. "I was showing Ellie my old designs." Margaret moved closer, genuinely curious. The open journal displayed intricate technical drawings annotated with precise handwriting. "These are remarkable," she said, meaning it. "I designed safety systems for nuclear facilities," James said, a hint of his former professional pride emerging. Before the forgetting. He spoke matter-of-factly about his condition now, a small victory in accepting help. "Daddy was building robot arms," Ellie announced, carefully turning pages with reverent fingers. "Mechanical containment systems," James corrected gently. "But, yes, a bit like robot arms." As Margaret put away groceries, she noticed a small envelope on the counter with Ellie's careful handwriting. "For Mrs. Holden, who makes good sandwiches." Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, a small one with pigtails, a tall one with spiky hair, and a medium one with a neat square around the head that Margaret realized represented her reading glasses. "It's our after-school family," Ellie explained, appearing at Margaret's elbow. "Do you like it?" The word family caught Margaret by surprise, unleashing unexpected emotion. "I love it," she managed. "May I put it on my refrigerator at home?" Ellie nodded solemnly. "It's okay if you don't have other pictures there. This one can be the first." The child's perception was startling. Margaret's refrigerator was indeed bare. No photos, no artwork, no evidence of connection. Later, as James, I helped Ellie with homework at the table, Margaret's phone vibrated. The name on the screen froze her in place. "Thomas. Son." Her finger hovered over the green answer button, trembling slightly. Stepping onto the porch for privacy, Margaret took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, son," she said, the word feeling rusty with disuse. Thomas's voice, deeper than she remembered, replied with careful formality. "Hello, Margaret. I'm calling about Thanksgiving. I'll be in Philadelphia for a conference that week, and I thought perhaps—" He paused, the weight of unspoken history stretching between them. "I thought perhaps it was time we had dinner." Margaret gripped the porch railing, steadying herself against the surge of hope and fear those simple words evoked. Through the window, she could see Ellie showing James her math homework, their heads bent together in a tableau of connection that Margaret had never managed with Thomas. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As she ended the call, Margaret looked at Ellie's drawing still in her hand, the 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Some repairs, it seemed, might still be possible. "He sounds exactly like you," Ryan remarked as he helped Margaret organize donated winter clothes in the school's resource room. Formal, careful with his words, measuring every sentence. Margaret sorted through scarves, considering Ryan's observation about her conversations with Thomas. Their weekly phone calls had become a highlight she both anticipated and dreaded. Bridges being built across a chasm of silence, board by precarious board. "We speak like polite acquaintances," she admitted, "which I suppose is what we are. I was always there physically, but never—" She searched for the word present. Outside the window, early November snow flurries danced in the air. The forecast warned of a harsh winter ahead. "This would fit Ellie perfectly," Ryan said, holding up a red wool coat with a matching hat. "The Thompsons' daughter outgrew it, barely used." Margaret added it to the box labeled Harper. The school's unofficial support network had expanded, teachers contributing outgrown children's clothes, cafeteria staff sending home extra meals, the nurse coordinating with Dr. Evans on James's care. "Thomas asked about my work yesterday," Margaret said, surprised by her need to share this. "He's never done that before. He asked about a specific student I've been helping." Ryan's eyebrows rose. "You told him about Ellie?" "Not by name," Margaret clarified. "Just that I've become involved in helping a student and her father through difficult circumstances. And—" "What did he say?" Margaret carefully folded a small sweater. "He said it didn't sound like me. The Margaret Holden he knew followed rules, not broke them." The bell rang, signaling the end of planning period. As Ryan headed to his classroom, he paused at the door. "Perhaps the Margaret Holden he knew and the Margaret Holden you're becoming are different people." His words followed Margaret throughout the day, through meetings and paperwork, through her after-school visit to the Harpers where she helped James organize his medication into a simple color-coded system. That evening, as snow began falling in earnest, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a small wooden box she rarely opened. Inside were fragments of motherhood: Thomas's hospital bracelet, a small blue knit hat, report cards with outstanding marks but few personal comments from teachers. Beneath these was a CD labeled Thomas Piano Recital Age 12. Margaret couldn't remember attending this performance, though surely she must have. She set it aside, continuing her archaeology through layers of her son's life. At the bottom of the box lay something she'd forgotten: a thumb drive with "Mom" birthday written in teenage handwriting. Margaret stared at it, a memory surfacing. Thomas had given this to her on her 50th birthday, but an emergency budget meeting had called her away. She'd meant to look at it later, but later never came. With trembling fingers, she inserted it into her laptop. A video file opened, showing a 17-year-old Thomas sitting awkwardly before the camera. "Hey, Mom," his younger self said. "I know you're busy with the school board meeting today, but I wanted to make you something. I found this old recording from when I was 12. You said you wished you'd seen more of my recitals, so here's one you can keep." The video cut to Thomas playing piano, his young face serious with concentration. As the simple, beautiful melody filled Margaret's living room, a text message appeared on her phone. "Weather alert. Severe snowstorm expected tonight. Travel not advised." Margaret glanced out the window at the rapidly accumulating snow, thinking of the Harpers' poorly insulated trailer. Without hesitation, she dialed James's number. Some bridges couldn't wait to be built. Margaret's car struggled through the deepening snow as she navigated the increasingly treacherous roads toward the Harpers' trailer. The forecast had deteriorated rapidly. What began as light flurries was now a genuine blizzard, with visibility dropping by the minute. James hadn't answered his phone. 3 calls had gone straight to voicemail, each unanswered message, increasing Margaret's anxiety. The trailer's heating system was unreliable at best, and their location at the end of Willow Road meant they would be last on the county's snow-clearing priority list, if they were on it at all. As she turned onto the final stretch, her headlights captured a figure trudging through the snow, a man walking unsteadily along the road's edge wearing only a light jacket. With a jolt of recognition, Margaret pulled alongside him and lowered her window. "James!" He turned, confusion clouding his features before recognition dawned. "Caroline!" Margaret's heart sank. It was one of his bad days, perhaps triggered by the stress of the storm. She quickly parked and approached him, snow swirling between them. "James, It's Margaret Holden, Ellie's principal. Where are you going? Where is Ellie? At his daughter's name, some clarity returned to his eyes. Ellie, she's at home. I needed to get... He looked down at his empty hands, the purpose of his journey clearly forgotten. I can't remember. Let's get you back home, Margaret said gently, guiding him toward her car. Ellie needs you. Ellie, he repeated, the name anchoring him momentarily to reality. Yes. She's doing homework. I told her I'd be right back. The drive to the trailer took twice as long as usual, the car sliding on unplowed roads. Margaret's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as James drifted between confusion and moments of lucidity beside her. I shouldn't have left her. He said suddenly, his voice breaking. What kind of father leaves his child alone in a snowstorm? A human one, Margaret replied, thinking of her own mistakes with Thomas. We all fail sometimes, James. The courage is in going back. The trailer was dark when they finally arrived. No lights visible. Through the increasing snowfall, Margaret's concern deepened as she helped James navigate the slippery steps. Ellie, he called as they entered. Sunshine, I'm home. Silence answered them. The small living space was cold, the electric heater silent. A power outage, Margaret realized. She used her phone's flashlight to scan the room, heart racing when she saw no sign of the little girl. Ellie, Margaret called, moving quickly toward the child's bedroom. Ellie, it's Mrs. Holden, a small voice answered from the bedroom. I'm here. I'm being a blanket burrito. Relief washed over Margaret as her light revealed Ellie wrapped in every blanket from the house, only her face visible in the nest she'd created on her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals. The lights went out, Ellie explained matter-of-factly, but I remembered what Daddy taught me about staying warm. James hurried to his daughter, checking her hands and face for signs of cold. I'm so sorry, Sunshine, I shouldn't have left. It's okay, Ellie said, with the remarkable resilience of children. I knew someone would come. Mrs. Holden always comes when we need help. The simple faith in the child's statement struck Margaret deeply. She'd never been that person before, the one who could be counted on in moments of crisis. With Thomas, she'd always been the one caught at work, sending substitutes in her place. The power could be out for hours, Margaret said, assessing the situation. We need to go somewhere. Warm. She made a quick decision. You're both coming to my house tonight. As they prepared to leave, Margaret's phone rang. The screen displayed Thomas' son. Mom? His voice sounded closer somehow, more urgent than their recent careful conversations. Where are you? I landed early for the conference and came straight to your house, but you're not home. The weather is getting bad. Margaret felt reality shift beneath her feet. Thomas, you're at my house, now? Yes, and I'm worried. The news says roads are closing. Where are you? Margaret looked at James and Ellie, now bundled in, their warmest clothes waiting expectantly. I'm with friends who need help, she said, the word friends feeling insufficient yet true, and I'm bringing them home. In the silence that followed, Margaret could almost hear the recalibration in her son's understanding of who she was. I'll put coffee on, he finally said, and make up the guest room. As they made their slow, careful journey through the storm, Margaret reflected on how weather had a way of revealing what truly mattered, and who would be there when the cold came. The drive to Margaret's house was a silent journey through a white void, broken only by Ellie's occasional whispered wow at the severity of the blizzard. Margaret's hands ached from gripping the steering wheel, her eyes strained from peering through the snow-clogged windshield. James sat with uncharacteristic clarity in the passenger seat, as if the emergency had temporarily burned through the fog of his condition. Will your son like me? Ellie asked from the back seat, her small voice barely audible above the storm's howl. The question caught Margaret off guard. Of course he will, sweetheart. He doesn't know about us, does he? James asked. Quietly. No, Margaret admitted. Not exactly. The truth hung between them, Margaret had kept the Harpers separate from her personal life, even as they had become central to it. Like many aspects of her carefully compartmentalized existence, her involvement with them existed behind invisible walls. Those walls were about to collapse. Thomas was waiting on the porch when they arrived, a tall figure silhouetted against porch lights. Margaret hadn't seen her son in person for nearly 3 years, not since a stilted lunch during a conference in Chicago. As she helped James and Ellie from the car, she caught Thomas's expression changing from concern to confusion. "Mom," his questioning tone carried through the howling wind. Margaret guided her unexpected guests toward the house. "Thomas, this is James Harper and his daughter Ellie. The storm caught them with no power. This is my son, Thomas." They converged on the porch in a flurry of snow and awkward introductions. Inside, the contrast between the storm's chaos and the house's ordered stillness was jarring. Margaret's home reflected her personality. Tasteful, minimalist, everything in its proper place. "Your house is like a picture in a magazine," Ellie observed, looking around with wide eyes, still bundled in her mismatched winter clothes. Thomas's assessing gaze moved from the child to her father, noting James's disorientation and Ellie's worn clothing. His legal training was evident in his careful observation before he spoke. "I've made hot chocolate," he said finally, addressing Ellie with unexpected gentleness, "with mini marshmallows." While Ellie enjoyed her treat in the kitchen, Thomas pulled Margaret aside in the living room. "This is the student situation you mentioned." His whispered question held no judgment, only surprise. Before Margaret could respond, a loud thud from the kitchen interrupted them. They rushed back to find James on the floor, having collapsed while trying to reach for his medication bag. "Daddy has bad spells sometimes," Ellie explained with the matter-of-factness of a child accustomed to adult emergencies. "He needs his special pills." Margaret quickly retrieved James's medication, while Thomas helped him to the sofa. The professional distance Margaret had maintained as Principal Holden vanished as she knelt beside James, helping him with his pills with the familiarity of someone who had done this many times before. Thomas watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," James managed once the moment passed. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Margaret replied firmly. "You're—" She hesitated, aware of Thomas's scrutiny. "Family," Ellie completed, her small hand covering Margaret's. "That's what you always tell Daddy when he says sorry too much." The simple declaration hung in the air between mother and son. Thomas's eyes reflected something Margaret hadn't seen in years, genuine curiosity about who she had become. The moment was interrupted by Margaret's phone ringing. The screen displayed Superintendent Caldwell. "Margaret, I've just received a concerning call." Caldwell's voice carried tension even through the speakerphone. "Social Services conducted an emergency welfare check on Ellie Harper after an anonymous report. They found an empty trailer with no power and evidence of a vulnerable child living in potentially dangerous conditions." Margaret's eyes met James's, both understanding the implications instantly. "Where is the child now?" Caldwell continued. "Because they're preparing an emergency removal order." The bureaucratic machinery Margaret had been holding at bay was now in motion, its gears turning with cold efficiency. Paper walls of regulations and protocols were closing in, threatening to separate a father and daughter who had already lost too much. "She's safe," Margaret said firmly, her hand moving instinctively to cover Ellie's. "She's with me." Morning light filtered through fresh snow, transforming Margaret's backyard into a glistening wonderland. Ellie pressed her nose against the window, her breath creating small clouds on the glass as she watched cardinals visit the bird feeder. Splash of vibrant red against winter white. Inside, the adults spoke in hushed tones around the kitchen table. "The emergency order gives us 48 hours, Thomas explained, his legal pad covered with notes from an early call to a colleague in family services. "After that, unless we can demonstrate adequate arrangements for Ellie's care, she'll be placed in temporary foster care pending evaluation." James sat with his head in his hands, the clarity of yesterday's crisis replaced by the morning's familiar fog. "I can't lose her," he whispered. "She's all I have left." Margaret placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, a gesture that didn't escape Thomas's notice. In the harsh morning light, the situation appeared in all its complexity. A principal who had crossed professional boundaries, a father losing his grip on reality, and a child caught between systems designed to protect but often failing to understand. "There might be another option," Thomas said after a moment. "Does Ellie have any extended family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles?" James looked up, confusion briefly crossing his features before something clicked. "Patricia," he said suddenly. "My sister." Margaret frowned. "You've never mentioned a sister before." "We haven't spoken in years," James admitted. "Not since Caroline's funeral." She thought. He paused, struggling to organize his thoughts. "She thought I couldn't care for Ellie alone. She wanted to take her then. Where is Patricia?" "Now?" Thomas asked, shifting into attorney mode. "I don't know. Oregon, maybe? She's a botanist, studies rare plants." James pressed his temples, visibly straining to retrieve memories. "There was a letter, last Christmas. I kept it somewhere." Margaret and Thomas exchanged glances. This potential lifeline would require delicate handling. Patricia might be Ellie's best chance for family care, but her previous attempt to separate father and daughter suggested complications. As James attempted to remember where he might have stored his sister's contact information, Ellie approached the table with a drawing. "Look, Mrs. Holden, it's us having breakfast in your fancy kitchen." Margaret examined the crayon illustration. 4 stick figures around a table, one notably taller than the others. "Who's this tall one?" Margaret asked, though she already knew. "That's Mr. Thomas," Ellie explained. "He makes the best hot chocolate, even better than the cafeteria ladies." She leaned closer to whisper, though everyone could hear. "I think he was sad when he got here, but he's less sad now." The innocence of her observation created a moment of awkward truth. Thomas cleared his throat, focusing intently on his legal pad. "I should check the roads," he said, standing abruptly. "See if they've been plowed yet." After he left, Margaret helped Ellie set up with crayons and paper in the living room, before rejoining James at the kitchen table. "Thomas was right," James said quietly. "About him being sad. I recognize it because I've carried the same thing since Caroline died. That weight you bear when you're separated from someone who should be close." Margaret felt a painful twinge of recognition. "James, there's something you should know about my relationship with Thomas. I wasn't a good mother," James finished gently. "You don't have to tell me. I see how you look at each other. But I also see how you are with Ellie. People can change, Margaret." From the living room came the sound of Thomas's voice, unusually animated as he admired Ellie's artwork. Margaret watched her son, kneeling beside the child, pointing out details in her drawing with genuine interest. "I found something," Thomas called, holding up a small blue envelope Ellie had pulled from her backpack. It was in the side pocket of Ellie's bag. James took the envelope with trembling hands. "Patricia's Christmas card," he confirmed. "She included her phone number. She always does, even though I never call." As Thomas reached for his phone, ready to contact this potential solution to their immediate crisis, Margaret felt an unexpected pang of loss. The Harpers had awakened something long dormant in her, a capacity for care that transcended professional obligation. The thought of Ellie leaving with a stranger, even a blood relative, created an ache she hadn't anticipated. "Before you call," Margaret said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice, "I want to discuss another option." 3 pairs of eyes turned to her, waiting. "What if I apply to become Ellie's temporary guardian?" "You want to become Ellie's guardian?" Thomas's incredulous question hung in the kitchen air. "Mom, you're 62 years old with a demanding career. You've never even mentioned wanting to care for a child." Margaret remained calm in the face of her son's bewilderment. "I'm aware of how this sounds, Thomas. But sometimes life presents opportunities for redemption in unexpected packages. James watched the exchange with a mixture of hope and hesitation. "Margaret, are you sure? This isn't a short-term commitment." "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Outside, the sun broke through clouds, casting rainbow prisms through frost-covered windows. Thomas paced the kitchen, legal training evident in his methodical response. "Even if this is what you want, the courts typically favor blood relatives. We should still contact Patricia while pursuing multiple options." Margaret nodded her agreement, knowing he was right despite the unexpected protectiveness she felt. In the living room, Ellie hummed softly while coloring, seemingly untroubled by the adult conversations determining her future. While Thomas made the call to Patricia, Margaret joined Ellie on the carpet. "I'm making a picture of our snow adventure," Ellie explained, showing a colorful rendering of 4 stick figures trudging through white crayon snowdrifts. "See? Daddy is holding my hand and you're holding my other hand and Mr. Thomas is leading the way with a flashlight." Margaret studied the image, noting how Ellie had depicted her family as connected, no one standing alone. "Ellie," Margaret began carefully, "you know that Dad is having trouble remembering things lately." The little girl nodded solemnly. "The doctors say his brain is changing faster than it should." "That's right, and because of that we might need to make some changes to help keep you safe and happy." Ellie's crayon paused mid-stroke. "Am I going to have to go away?" The question, asked with such quiet dread, pierced Margaret's carefully maintained composure. "Not if I can help it," she promised, then added more cautiously. "But there might be conversations with people whose job is making sure children are taken care of properly." Ellie considered this, then returned to her coloring. "I think you would take care of me properly, Mrs. Holden. You remember to cut the crusts off my sandwiches, and you never forget to check my homework folder." The simple vote of confidence from a 6-year-old carried more weight than all the UA professional accolades Margaret had accumulated over her career. From the kitchen came the sound of Thomas's voice, his tone shifting from professional to surprised, as his call with Patricia apparently took an unexpected turn. When he returned to the living room, his expression was difficult to read. "Patricia Harper is on her way here," he announced. "She lives in Pittsburgh now, not Oregon. She can be here by tomorrow if the roads are clear." James's face showed relief mingled with apprehension. "How did she sound?" "Concerned," Thomas answered diplomatically, "and very interested in Ellie's welfare." He hesitated before adding, "She had a lot of questions about the school principal who's been helping you." Margaret felt herself being evaluated in absentia. "Did you tell her about my guardianship idea?" "I mentioned it as one potential option," Thomas replied, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Actually, she seemed more curious than opposed. She wants to meet you before making any judgments." Throughout the day, as they waited for roads to clear and agencies to reopen, the impromptu household fell into a surprising rhythm. Thomas helped Ellie build a snow fort in the backyard while Margaret and James worked together preparing lunch. There was an ease to their interactions that belied the temporary nature of their arrangement. That evening, after Ellie had gone to bed in Margaret's guest room and James had retired to the sofa, Thomas found Margaret sitting in the kitchen, reviewing guardianship application forms she'd printed from the county website. "You're really serious about this," he observed, pouring himself a cup of tea. "I am," Margaret replied without looking up. "Why?" The question was simple but loaded with decades of history. Margaret finally met her son's eyes. "Because when I look at Ellie, I see a child who needs someone to put her first. And when I look at myself, I see someone who failed to do that once before." The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken regrets and long-dormant grief. "I can't change our past, Thomas," Margaret continued softly, "but perhaps I can create a different future for Ellie." Thomas studied his mother, the determined set of her shoulders, the new softness around her eyes. "You've changed," he said finally. "Yes," she agreed, thinking of the rigid, career-focused woman she'd been. Just months ago, I believe I have. As the snow continued to fall gently outside, Margaret returned to her paperwork with renewed purpose, aware that tomorrow would bring Patricia Harper, and with her, the next challenge in their unfolding story. Patricia Harper arrived precisely at noon the following day, her rental car pulling into Margaret's cleared driveway with punctual efficiency. From the living room window, Margaret observed a tall woman with James's same dark eyes and determined chin, dressed in practical layers against the winter chill. "She's here," Margaret announced, her calm tone belying the nervousness fluttering in her chest. James stood, smoothing his borrowed sweater. His morning medications had him clear-eyed but visibly anxious. Ellie, who had been building a castle of couch cushions with Thomas, immediately ran to her father's side. "Is Aunt Patty mad at us?" she whispered, clutching his hand. "No, sunshine," James assured her. "She just wants to make sure you're okay." The doorbell rang and Thomas answered, his attorney persona firmly in place. "Ms. Harper, I'm Thomas Holden. We spoke on the phone. Please come in." Patricia entered, removing her gloves with methodical precision. Her gaze swept the room, cataloging details before settling first on her brother, then on Ellie, and finally on Margaret. "James," she acknowledged with a nod that carried years of complicated history. Then, kneeling to Ellie's height, "Hello, Ellie Belly. You've grown so much." Ellie studied her aunt with cautious curiosity. "You look like Daddy, but with girl hair." A smile briefly softened Patricia's serious expression. "That's because we had the same mom and dad." She gently touched Ellie's cheek. "You have your mother's smile." The mention of Caroline shifted the atmosphere, a shared grief momentarily connecting the adults in the room. "Mrs. Holden has been helping us," Ellie announced, gesturing toward Margaret. "She makes sure I have lunch every day, and she helps Daddy with his special doctor." Patricia straightened, extending her hand to Margaret. "I appreciate what you've done for my brother and niece, Mrs. Holden, though I admit I'm curious about your involvement." "Perhaps we could talk privately," Margaret suggested, recognizing the evaluation taking place behind Patricia's polite facade. While Thomas entertained Ellie and James rested in the guest room, Margaret led Patricia to her home office. The room, with its orderly bookshelves and framed educational certificates, represented the Principal Holden that Patricia would expect. Professional, accomplished, proper. "You have questions," Margaret began, taking a seat behind her desk out of habit. "Many," Patricia confirmed, remaining standing. "Starting with why my brother didn't call me when his condition worsened. I had to learn about all this from a stranger." "James is a proud man," Margaret replied, "and from what I understand, your last interactions were strained." Patricia's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "I tried to help after Caroline died. I offered to take Ellie while James got treatment. He refused. Said I was trying to steal his daughter." Her voice tightened with old hurt. "I backed away because he demanded it, not because I stopped caring." Margaret considered the botanical prints on Patricia's scarf, the precision in her movements, the scientific approach to her emotions. She recognized a kindred spirit, another woman who lived primarily in her head rather than her heart. "James keeps a photo of you holding Ellie as a baby," Margaret said gently. "It's on his bedside table even now." Something flickered in Patricia's expression. Surprise, then a quickly suppressed emotion. "I didn't know that." She finally took a seat, her professional armor showing the first signs of softening. "Now about this guardianship idea of yours, what exactly are you proposing?" Margaret outlined her plan: temporary guardianship while James received proper treatment, allowing Ellie stability and continued contact with her father. As she spoke, she felt herself being clinically assessed by Patricia's sharp gaze. "You're a single woman in your 60s with a demanding career and no experience raising a child with special needs," Patricia stated bluntly. "Why should the court choose you over a blood relative?" The question hung in the air between them, the obvious practical question that any reasonable person would ask. Margaret's prepared answers about community support and professional resources suddenly seemed hollow in the face of Patricia's directness. Instead, Margaret opened her desk drawer and removed a small pink unicorn beret. "Ellie left this here yesterday," she explained, holding the inexpensive plastic clip like a precious artifact. "This morning, I found myself checking if I had extra fruit for her lunch, wondering if her snow boots needed waterproofing, worrying whether she's getting enough vegetables." Margaret's voice remained steady, but her eyes betrayed her emotion. "I don't have experience raising a child with Down syndrome, Ms. Harper, but I do know what it means to care so deeply about someone that their needs become more important than your own convenience." Patricia studied Margaret for a long moment, her scientific assessment meeting unexpected data. Finally, she reached into her purse and removed a photograph. Ellie, as a toddler, laughing on a swing pushed by her father. "I've carried this for 3 years," she said quietly. "I never stopped caring either." The two women regarded each other across the desk, recognition dawning that perhaps they weren't adversaries after all. The county social services building stood like a fortress of bureaucracy, its gray concrete walls seeming especially forbidding under the winter sky. Margaret climbed the steps with determined strides, clutching a folder containing her hastily assembled guardianship application. Behind her, Thomas carried his legal briefcase, his expression professionally neutral despite the stakes. "Remember," he advised quietly, "Judge Winters is thorough but fair. Answer her questions directly, and don't volunteer additional information unless asked." Margaret nodded, grateful for her son's expertise but distracted by the text message she'd received just minutes earlier from Superintendent Caldwell. "Board emergency meeting scheduled for 3 p.m. regarding your professional conduct. Attendance mandatory." The timing couldn't have been worse. Their family court appointment was at 2:30, with no way to predict how long it would take. For the first time in her career, Margaret faced the very real possibility of having to choose between her professional obligations and something more personal. Inside, they found Patricia already waiting in the sterile corridor, reviewing documents with focused intensity. She'd spent the previous evening at Margaret's house, the 3 adults staying up late crafting a unified approach despite their different perspectives. "Where are James and Ellie?" Patricia asked, looking up from her paperwork. "Ryan Cooper is bringing them," Margaret explained. "James was having a difficult morning." Patricia's expression tightened with concern. "How difficult?" "He didn't recognize Ellie at first," Margaret admitted, "but the episode passed quickly." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a sharply dressed woman who introduced herself as Andrea Wilson, the county's appointed child welfare attorney. Her clinical assessment of their group carried the weariness of someone who had seen too many family tragedies. "I've reviewed the emergency petition," she stated without preamble. "Given the circumstances, my recommendation will be temporary placement with the maternal or paternal relatives while the father's condition is evaluated." Her gaze fixed on Margaret. "Mrs. Holden, while your involvement is commendable, the courts typically favor family placement." Before Margaret could respond, the courthouse doors opened, and Ryan entered with James and Ellie. The contrast between their appearances was striking. James looked disheveled despite obvious efforts to appear presentable, while Ellie was neatly dressed in the red coat Ryan had found in the school's donation box, her hair carefully braided. "Mrs. Holden," Ellie called out, breaking away to run toward Margaret. "I wore my special unicorn socks for good luck." Margaret knelt to embrace her, aware of Andrea Wilson's assessing gaze. "Those are perfect for today," she assured the child. As their hearing time approached, Margaret's phone vibrated with another message from Caldwell. "Your absence will be noted as insubordination. 25 years of service deserves better than this, Margaret. 25 years. A quarter-century of dedication to Willow Creek Elementary." Margaret stared at the message, feeling the weight of her professional identity pressing against this new, unfamiliar role she'd assumed in Ellie's life. Thomas noticed her expression. "What is it?" "Nothing that can't wait," Margaret replied, silencing her phone as the court officer called their names. Inside the courtroom, Judge Winters, a stern woman, with kind eyes, reviewed their unusual case with meticulous attention. James struggled to answer basic questions about his health history, his confusion evident despite his efforts. When Patricia presented herself as a potential guardian, her professional credentials and blood relationship clearly impressed the judge. Then came the moment Margaret had both anticipated and dreaded. "Mrs. Holden," Judge Winters addressed her directly, "your petition is unusual. You have no prior relationship with this child beyond your professional capacity as her principal. You're not a relative, you have no experience as a foster parent, and frankly, at your age, taking on a child with special needs represents a significant challenge." The courtroom fell silent, the judge's words hanging in the air like a verdict. "Why should I consider your petition over that of a qualified blood relative?" Margaret felt all eyes upon her. Thomas's concern, Patricia's curiosity, James's foggy gratitude, and, most importantly, Ellie's absolute trust. In the back of her mind, she knew the school board was gathering, her career hanging in the balance of her absence. She stood straighter, finding unexpected clarity. In this moment of choosing, "Your Honor, on paper, I understand how inappropriate my petition appears. I'm 62 years old. I've never raised a child with Down syndrome. Until recently, my life was defined by schedules and regulations rather than relationships." Margaret paused, then continued, with quiet conviction. "But perhaps what Ellie needs most isn't found on paper. Perhaps what she needs is someone who understands that age has taught me what truly matters. I've earned enough plaques to fill a wall, but never enough love to fill a home. Until now." As she spoke these words, Margaret realized she was not just addressing the judge, but also her son, herself, and the lifetime of choices that had led to this pivotal moment. "I'm not asking to replace Ellie's family," she concluded, glancing toward Patricia and James. "I'm asking to expand it, to provide stability while her father gets the help he needs and her aunt remains connected to her life. Sometimes family is made through biology, and sometimes through choice. I'm choosing Ellie, Your Honor. With all my heart, I'm choosing her." In the silence that followed, Margaret's phone vibrated once more in her pocket, a final summons she had already decided to ignore. Some battles were worth losing for the right reasons. Temporary joint guardianship granted to Margaret Holden and Patricia Harper, with scheduled visitation for James Harper during treatment. Judge Winters' ruling echoed in Margaret's mind as she stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, still processing the unexpected compromise. The judge had recognized the unusual nature of their situation and crafted a solution that acknowledged both Patricia's familial rights and Margaret's established bond with Ellie. "We did it," Patricia whispered, her scientific composure momentarily cracking to reveal genuine emotion. Thomas squeezed Margaret's shoulder, pride evident in his eyes. "Well done, Mom." But their victory was bittersweet. Margaret's phone displayed 7 missed calls from Superintendent Caldwell. Her absence from the emergency board meeting had consequences she would soon have to face. As Ellie skipped between the adults, chattering about having 2 homes now, Margaret realized some sacrifices were worth every cost. 1 month later, Margaret stood in her garden, watching Thomas and Ellie plant spring bulbs in freshly thawed soil. Winter was retreating, leaving puddles of possibility in its wake. "Plant them pointy side up," Thomas instructed patiently. "They'll know which way to grow." "Like people," Ellie observed. "We know which way to grow too." Margaret smiled at the child's wisdom. So much had changed in such a short time. Her career at Willow Creek had ended, not with the retirement celebration she once imagined, but with a negotiated resignation that preserved her dignity and pension. The school board had understood her choices, even if they couldn't officially condone them. James was showing improvement. At the treatment center where Patricia had helped secure him a place, his good days were becoming more frequent, his connection to Ellie maintained through regular visits, and Thomas, her once distant son, had extended his stay indefinitely, converting Margaret's home office into a remote workspace. For his legal practice. Margaret, Patricia approached, clipboard in hand as always. The home study evaluator is coming tomorrow. I've prepared a checklist of final preparations. Their partnership as co-guardians had evolved into an unexpected friendship, Patricia's scientific precision balancing Margaret's newfound emotional openness. We'll be ready, Margaret assured her, watching Ellie press a tulip bulb into the earth with gentle fingers. Some endings, Margaret had learned, were actually beginnings in disguise. Spring sunshine streamed through Margaret's kitchen windows, illuminating the Sunday dinner table set with her special occasion china that had rarely seen use before. Around it sat the unlikely family that had formed through winter's challenges, Margaret and Thomas, Patricia and James, having one of his good days, and Ellie proudly wearing the assistant chef apron Thomas had given her. "Can I bring Maya from my class next Sunday?" Ellie asked as she carefully arranged napkins beside each plate. "Of course," Margaret answered warmly. "This table has been waiting for more people all my life." After dinner, in a quiet moment as the others cleared dishes, Ellie retrieved her purple backpack, now repaired and clean, and emptied its contents onto Margaret's desk. "I don't need to carry extra lunches anymore," she explained solemnly. Together, they refilled it with fresh school supplies, a healthy lunch, and a small framed photo of their blended family. "The backpack that once carried my worries now carries my happiness," Ellie said, repeating a phrase Margaret had taught her. As they turned off the lights that evening, Ellie whispered, "I'm glad I brought that smelly backpack to school that day." Margaret smiled in the darkness. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I. Sometimes the heaviest things we carry lead us exactly where we need to go."